Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm going to show you how to design a simple mechanism in the multi-item auction where the seller has a cost in this item. So it's a joint work with my advisor, Yang Cai from Yale University. So here's the classic revenue maximization problem, which I believe most of you are familiar with. So there are multiple items, and the seller is selling these items to multiple buyers, where each buyer has its own valuation function on the set of items. And the seller is going to design a mechanism to maximize the revenue. Okay? And in our paper, we consider a realistic generalization of this setting where we allow the seller to have a cost on each item. Okay, so you can view this cost as a production cost where which the seller needs to produce this item, or you can view it as an opportunity cost where there's a outside option which allows to sell this item at a certain price. Okay, and again, this cost vectors is drawn from some known distribution, and the objective of the seller becomes to maximize the profit, which is the revenue minus the cost. Okay, and here's a realistic problem that related to our setting. It's called ad auction. So in an ad auction, the auctioneer is selling a ad slots to advertisers, and there are m different type of viewers. Each advertiser has a different value for displaying his ads to a different type of viewer. And the probability that each type of viewer showing up draws from a prior pi. Okay? And only the auctioneer can observe the realized type of the viewer, while the advertisers only know the prior. There's a line of work studying the signaling in the mechanisms for ad auctions, where the seller sends a signal to the buyer based on the type of viewers and according to a signaling scheme that is known to the buyer. The buyer then updates the posterior belief of the type of the viewer after receiving a signal, and then the seller will sell the ad slots using the mechanisms based on this posterior. Okay, and in these works, they basically fix the format of the mechanism and try to find the optimal signaling scheme. And the class is all 16 also works on this problem, but in a different perspective. They proved a reduction from the ad auction problem to the revenue maximization problem for multiple additive buyers, where the former cases is well studied. Okay? And we point out that this ad auction problem is a special case of our setting. As we view each type of viewer as an item, the cost distribution can be defined as follows, where we have zero cost for the type of viewer that shows up and infinity cost elsewhere. Okay. So our problem is also related to the two-sided markets, where both buyers and seller has its own private value on the items. And the major difference is in the two-sided market, the mechanism designer is considered as a third party, and the mechanism is designed to incentivize all the agents to report their private values truthfully. However, in our model, we do not impose the seller's truthfulness constraint by assuming that the seller has committing power. So this is a standard assumption in both mechanism design and information design. Okay. Back to the classic revenue maximization problem. Well, in multi-item case, it's well known that the optimal mechanism is randomized and extremely complex, and yet there's a large body of beautiful work who managed to generalize the result, the simple versus optimal result to the multiple buyer, multiple item case, where it's a relatively broad valuation function. Working on generalization of the classic, revenue maximization problem, we also aimed for designing a simple and approximation optimal mechanism in our setting. Okay, and a natural problem or a natural question that comes out is there anything different? Is there anything different from the setting where we have a zero cost? To illustrate the challenge of our problem, let's first take a look at the two natural but failed attempts. So the first attempt is to, instead of optimizing the profit, we use the mechanism that optimizes the revenue. Well, this is clearly not a good solution because the items sold in the mechanism might have an extremely high cost, which ruins the profit. The second attempt is to reveal the cost vector to the buyer and then use the approximately optimal mechanism on this particular cost. Well, this looks a reasonable solution, but we have an example which shows that this mechanism is far from the optimal. Okay, so consider this example where we have a single additive buyer and the buyer's value for each item draw from the equal revenue distribution. And the cost distribution is defined similar to the at auction case where each type of viewer is shown with equal probability. In this example, if we first reveal the cost vector to the buyer, we can at most extract one profit, because if we do that, we can only sell this particular item with zero cost to the buyer, right? So we can get at most one. However, there's a mechanism that can do way better than this. Consider the mechanism that offers a contract to the buyer, saying if the buyer pays log m over 2 upfront, she can get any item with zero cost for free. Okay? So we notice that the buyer has to make the choice before she realizes which item has zero cost. So she is able to get each item with probability 1 over m, right? So her expected utility is the average of these values, and by EC'18, we know that the expected profit of this mechanism is at least log m over 4. Okay, and this example is very similar to the SREV versus BREV argument. And by this example, we know that simply revealing the cost is not a good choice. By the above two examples, we have pointed out two major challenges of our problem. One is, of course, to balance the revenue and cost, and the second is to capture the buyer's information rent, where we see in the above example, we can actually extract more revenue by using the fact that the true cost is a private information. And in our paper, we come up with this permit selling mechanism, which solve all these challenges. So here is the mechanism for the single buyer case. We have two stages. At the first stages, instead of selling the item, the seller first sells the permit for each item without revealing her true cost. Okay? And after the buyer buys a set of permits, we come to the second stage where the seller reveals her true cost. And moreover, the buyer is not allowed to purchase an item if she don't have a permit for it. Okay? And then the buyer will choose her favorite bundle by paying the item price as the true cost. Okay? And in fact, in the proof, we don't need a complex mechanism to sell this permit. We just need these two classes of mechanisms to either sell the permit separately or as a whole bundle. Okay? And also, we will need the following mechanism, which reveal the cost first to the buyer and then sell items separately using item price that may depend on the seller's realized cost. Okay? And here is the main result of our paper. So we proved that the best mechanism among these three classes is an 11 approximation for the single constrained additive buyer. So here's the definition of constrained additive. Is the buyer is only allowed to take a feasible set of items that up to a downward closed constraint, and it's additive across these items. When we come to the additive case, the approximation ratio is improved to 6, and moreover, our result applies to any correlated cost distribution. And then we generalize the result to the multiple matrix rank buyer case, and so here matrix rank is just a special case of this constraint additive. And we prove that in this case, there exists a simple and truthful mechanism that achieve a constant fraction of the optimum profit. The mechanisms for this multiple buyer case are more involved, and we will elaborate more in the at the last of the talk. Okay. Constraint additive, yes, we will have like a downward close constraint on this bias valuation. Okay, so for now, let's focus on the single buyer case and see how we prove it. So similar to the revenue maximization problem, the major challenge is to come up with a benchmark of the optimal profit. And so in the paper, we will use this Heidi-Weinberg duality framework. And we'll only sketch the progress of this framework. So I first formulate the maximization problem as an LP and take the Lagrangian dual. By weak duality, for any choice of the dual variable, the Lagrangian is considered as a benchmark of the optimal profit. And in previous works, what they proved is any dual variable that derives a finite benchmark forms a flow, and they chose the canonical flow that derives a useful benchmark in the revenue maximization problem. And this is what they do for the single buyer case. So they divide the whole type space into M regions based on the largest value item, and let the flow go between two types inside the same region Rj, only if they differ only on the j's coordinate. So as you can see, this what they look like for the two item case. Okay, and we point out that their flow does not directly apply here, because as we have the cost distribution, the flow must also depend on the information of the cost, the seller's cost distribution. Right? It is possible to make some slight change, and in fact, if the cost is fixed, it will work if we use the cost as a cutoff, and we divide the region based on the largest gap between the value and the cutoff. And this idea is also used in the previous works when they are doing approximately optimal mechanisms for a multi-buyer case. So based on this fact, one attempt is to use a distribution of flows where each flow corresponds to the fixed but the realized true cost. Okay. However, this fails to give us a useful benchmark because the benchmark is too complex to analyze, and we didn't come up with a mechanism to approximate this benchmark. Okay, so here's what we did in the proof. We construct a new valuation V bar on the same set of type space. And to understand this definition, we point out this V bar function is exactly the buyer's expected utility in the second stage of the permit selling mechanism. Okay, given that he has purchased the set of permit P on the first stage. Okay, and then we divide the region based on this the largest singleton value of V bar. Okay, so intuitively, instead of choosing the divide the region based on this favorite item, we divide this region based on the favorite permit. Okay, so the flow now looks a different shape from the previous flow, but it maintains a nice format that on each region it is upward close on this own coordinate. So take an example, if we have a type here in R2, and if we increase the second coordinate, the new type will also be in R2. Okay, so with this nice format, we are able to prove this benchmark of the optimal profit. You don't need to care much about this formula. We just we have these two terms, and we will in the proof we bound both of the terms using a simple mechanism. Okay. So this first term, if you're familiar with the approximation optimal mechanism, this looks very similar to the single term, and we can bound it using a relatively standard technique. And for the second term, it looks a bit different, and we will briefly discuss how we do on this. Okay. So as you can see, this is the sum of the bidder's value for all the item that is not the favorite permit, okay, but under a new valuation V bar. Okay. To bound this term, we will consider a related revenue maximization problem where the seller is actually selling the permit now, but the buyer is having the valuation V bar on this permit. Okay? And we notice that since this V bar is the expected utility, on a set of permits in the permit selling mechanism, we are able to prove a reduction from any truthful mechanism in this setting to a permit selling mechanism in this setting. And moreover, we know that the revenue on this mechanism will be equal to the profit on this mechanism because on the second stage, the item price will exactly cover the cost, right? Okay, by having this reduction, the problem is reduced to, how to design a mechanism whose revenue can approximate the benchmark in this revenue maximization setting. Okay, and we notice that on this setting, this term is just simply core plus tail, and since we can prove that this V bar is a subadditive function, by previous result, we can bound this term by selling items separately or as a whole bundle. Okay, so for the multi-item case, for the multiple buyer case, we make a slightly change on this permit selling mechanism. Is we now sell the permit as well as the items sequentially, and for each buyer I, at the first stage we sell the permit without revealing the true cost C as well as the type profile of other buyers. And on the second stage, we reveal the remaining item set and the true cost, and sell each remaining item with a price that is at least the seller's cost. Okay. And how we get this benchmark is also different from the previous works, and we just point out that we in this proof we combine our new flow with the ex-ante relaxation technique. But since the flow is getting more involved, we won't get into too much detail here. Okay. So at last, let me just point out two directions of open problems. So the first is how to generalize the result for the single buyer case beyond constraint additive. So this requires us to prove a valuation relaxation kind of result, where if we relax the valuation, the new optimal profit will be comparable to the old one. And also another direction is for the multiple buyer case, how we make the mechanism to be truthful, actually incident compatible and individual rational for any other buyer's type profile. Because now our mechanism is only big and internal IR because the buyer has to make the choice before seeing the T-minus sign. Okay, so that's all for my talk. Thank you very much.